from which proceed a flame when they are opened in their season. When the sun rises in the heaven, he comes forth through that fourth portal 30 mornings in succession, and sets accurately in the fourth portal in the west of the heaven. And during this period the day becomes daily longer and the night nightly shorter to the 30th morning. On that day the day is longer than the night by a 9th part, and the day amounts exactly to 10 parts and the night to 8 parts. And the sun rises from that fourth portal, and sets in the fourth and returns to the fifth portal of the east 30 mornings, and rises from it and sets in the fifth portal. And then the day becomes longer by 2 parts and amounts to 11 parts, and the night becomes shorter and amounts to 7 parts. And it returns to the east and enters into the sixth portal, and rises and sets in the sixth portal 1 and 30 mornings on account of its sign. On that day the day becomes longer than the night, and the day becomes double the night, and the day becomes 12 parts, and the night is shortened and becomes 6 parts. And the sun mounts up to make the day shorter and the night longer, and the sun returns to the east and enters into the sixth portal, and rises from it and sets 30 mornings. And when 30 mornings are accomplished, the day decreases by exactly 1 part, and becomes 11 parts, and the night 7. And the sun goes forth from that sixth portal in the west, and goes to the east and rises in the fifth portal for 30 mornings, and sets in the west again in the fifth western portal. On that day the day decreases by 2 parts, and amounts to 10 parts and the night to 8 parts. And the sun goes forth from that fifth portal and sets in the fifth portal of the west, and rises in the fourth portal for 1 and 30 mornings on account of its sign, and sets in the west. On that day the day is equalized with the night, and becomes of equal length, and the night amounts to 9 parts and the day to 9 parts. And the sun rises from that portal and sets in the west, and returns to the east and rises 30 mornings in the third portal and sets in the west in the third portal. And on that day the night becomes longer than the day, and night becomes longer than night, and day shorter than day till the 30th morning, and the night amounts exactly to 10 parts and the day to 8 parts. And the sun rises from that third portal and sets in the third portal in the west and returns to the east, and for 30 mornings rises in the second portal in the east, and in like manner sets in the second portal in the west of the heaven. And on that day the night amounts to 11 parts and the day to 7 parts. And the sun rises on that day from that second portal and sets in the west in the second portal, and returns to the east into the first portal for 1 and 30 mornings, and sets in the first portal in the west of the heaven. And on that day the night becomes longer and amounts to the double of the day, and the night amounts exactly to 12 parts and the day to 6. And the sun has therewith traversed the divisions of his orbit and turns again on those divisions of his orbit, and enters that portal 30 mornings and sets also in the west opposite to it. And on that night has the night decreased in length by a 9th part, and the night has become 11 parts and the day 7 parts. And the sun has returned and entered into the second portal in the east, and returns on those his divisions of his orbit for 30 mornings, rising and setting. And on that day the night decreases in length, and the night amounts to 10 parts and the day to 8. And on that day the sun rises from that portal, and sets in the west, and returns to the east, and rises in the third portal for 1 and 30 mornings, and sets in the west of the heaven. On that day the night decreases and amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts, and the night is equal to the day and the year is exactly as to its days 364. And the length of the day and of the night, and the shortness of the day and of the night arise through the course of the sun. These distinctions are made that they are separated. So it comes that its course becomes daily longer, and its course nightly shorter. And this is the law and the course of the sun, and his return as often as he returns 60 times and rises, that is the great luminary which is named the sun, for ever and ever. and that which thus rises is the great luminary, and is so named according to its appearance, according as the Master commanded. As he rises, so he sets and decreases not, and rests not, but runs day and night, and his light is sevenfold brighter than that of the moon. But as regards size they are both equal. Chapter 2. And after this law I saw another law dealing with a smaller luminary, which is named the moon. And her circumference is like the circumference of the heaven, and her chariot in which she rides is driven by the wind, and light is given to her in definite measure. And her rising and setting change every month, and her days are like the days of the sun, and when her light is uniform that is full it amounts to the seventh part of the light of the sun. And thus she rises. And her first phase in the east comes forth on the 30th morning, and on that day she becomes visible, and constitutes for you the first phase of the moon on the 30th day together with the sun in the portal where the sun rises. And the one half of her goes forth by a seventh part, and her whole circumference is empty, without light, with the exception of 1/7 part of it, and the 14th part of her light. And when she receives 1/7 part of the half of her light amounts to 1/7 part and the half thereof. And she sets with the sun, and when the sun rises the moon rises with him and receives the half of 1 part of light, and in that night in the beginning of her morning in the commencement of the lunar day the moon sets with the sun, and is invisible that night with the 14 parts and the half of 1 of them. And she rises on that day with exactly a 7th part, and comes forth and recedes from the rising of the sun, and in her remaining days she becomes bright in the remaining 13 parts. Chapter 3. And I saw another course, a law for her, and how according to that law she performs her monthly revolution. And all these Auido, the holy angel who is the leader of them all, showed to me, and their positions, and I wrote down their positions as he showed them to me, and I wrote down their months as they were, and the appearance of their lights till 15 days were accomplished. In single 7th parts she accomplishes all her light in the east, and in single 7th parts accomplishes all her darkness in the west. And in certain months she alters her settings, and in certain months she pursues her own peculiar course. In 2 months the moon sets with the sun, in those 2 middle portals the 3rd and the 4th. She goes forth for 7 days, and turns about and returns again through the portal where the sun rises, and accomplishes all her light, and she recedes from the sun, and in 8 days enters the 6th portal from which the sun goes forth. And when the sun goes forth from the 4th portal she goes forth 7 days, until she goes forth from the 5th and turns back again in 7 days into the 4th portal and accomplishes all her light, and she recedes and enters into the 1st portal in 8 days. And she returns again in 7 days into the 4th portal from which the sun goes forth. Thus I saw their position how the moons rose and the sun set in those days. And if 5 years are added together the sun has an overplus of 30 days, and all the days which accrue to it for one of those 5 years, when they are full, amount to days. And the overplus of the sun and of the stars amounts to 6 days, in years days every year come to days, and the moon falls behind the sun and stars to the number of days. And the sun and the stars bring in all the years exactly, so that they do not advance or delay their position by a single day unto eternity, but complete the years with perfect justice in days. In years there are days, and in years, days, so that in years there are days. For the moon alone the days amount in years to days, and in years she falls days behind, that is to the sum of, there is to be added, and days. And in years there are days, so that for the moon the days in years amount to days. For in years she falls behind to the amount of days, all the days she falls behind in years are. And the year is accurately completed in conformity with their world stations and the stations of the sun, which rise from the portals through which the sun rises and sets days.